And then he said, and what have you Americans done? You've encouraged uprisings in Tunisia, Libya, Syria, Yemen in 2010, 2011, and it's led to chaos and disorder, and even in Tunisia's case, to a retrenchment back to authoritarianism.
I'm going to start by asking the question, does the age of strong men conclusively mark the end of the idea that liberal democracy remains the most universally desirable political system? And of course, Francis, I have to go to you first.
Well, there's an underlying problem that I think believers in liberal democracy like me have not fully dealt with and really need to, which is the proceduralism that is entailed by a liberal regime. I mean, what defines a liberal regime is basically the rule of law, and that is acting as a constraint on state power. But I think in many modern democracies, you have so many constraints, and somebody commits a crime and it's 5 to 10 years before it comes to trial, and even then the accused gets off. There's just a lot of frustration with the inability of countries to build infrastructure. I think one of the things that has made China attractive is that it builds stuff in a way that Western countries no longer do, and they can do it because they are authoritarian. They don't have to have so many town hall meetings and consultations with stakeholders and the like. And I think that that was one of the selling points of Trump himself. He was a builder, but he also, I think, expressed a great frustration with the kinds of rules that inhibited America and, this is not just an American disease, other liberal democracies from really getting stuff done. So this is a way of saying that, yes, there is this tendency to admire strong men, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. It really, does, I think, have a basis in a lot of liberal practices and what you might call an excessive reliance on rule of law. And I just want to make clear, this is bad. The proceduralism that liberal societies have burdened themselves with is excessive, but the solution is not to throw everything out the window. That's what Nayib Bukele has done in El Salvador. He's arrested, a major proportion of all the young men in the country without any kind of due process in order to get the murder rate down. But people look at this and they say, yeah, but you can take your family out to the park in the evening, and that's why they voted for him in very large numbers for his second term. And so this is an issue, I think, that we believers in liberalism really need to think through carefully about how you tread a kind of middle path between the actual ability to do things and this kind of out of control authoritarianism.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, Robert, Frank is talking about rule-based systems within a country, but we're now also seeing the end probably of rule-based international systems. Certainly, the US doesn't seem interested in them anymore and used to be the main upholder of them. Russia certainly isn't interested. Does that make liberal democracies just sort of too soft to be able to deal with this form of authoritarianism?
I'm not sure. I end my most recent book saying liberalism is ultimately all we have. Classical liberalism is all we have left, despite all the allures of other systems. It hasn't been proven that people are generally more happier under different regimes. However, here's the problem. Here's the difficulty, and it was summed up to me by a Saudi notable I was speaking to the last time I was in Saudi Arabia. He said, we've had the same family in power for over 100 years. We've had like 6, 7 changes of government, of power when the king has died. all peaceful. Even when King Faisal was assassinated in 1975, within 24 hours, there was a new leader, another moderate conservative leader, so to speak. We've liberated one half of the population, women, which changes the behavior of the other half of the population somewhat. And then he said, "And what have you Americans done? You've encouraged uprisings in Tunisia, Libya, Syria, Yemen in 2010, 2011, and it's led to chaos and disorder, and even in Tunisia's case, to a retrenchment back to authoritarianism." So that, there are systems and there are ways where strong men rule, but it's a crapshoot. As I responded to him, it happens to work here imperfectly, here being Saudi Arabia. But in terms of a system, I can't think of any other system with all of its drawbacks, than liberalism.
Okay, who's going to make the case against that? Juliet, you're smiling.
Well, I think a few things. I think one element of the strongman appeal, well, definitely, as Francis said, I think there's a clear failure of our system to be able to show that it can adapt and radically change and embrace reform where reform is needed. And I mean, we're rife. There are so many examples across Europe as well as the US. I won't sort of go into too many of them, but I think the other element of the strongman appeal is maybe a kind of spiritual crisis. I mean, in the way that fascism was in many ways, perhaps a response to the death of religion, whereby the end of hierarchies or any kind of social cohesion left people feeling basically meaningless. And I think the technological change we've had, whereby this exchange of ideas, the ferment of ideas, has sped up to such a degree that a lot of people feel really bewildered, and they perhaps miss a sense of hierarchy or unifying meaning that could be given. Some of them feel by a strong leader. In terms of the rule-based order, I think the truth is that having set up many of these institutions, the Western liberal countries basically neglected them and, handed them over to lawyers, and then also allowed, other geopolitical sort of rivals to enter these systems and to subvert them or to change them. And, look at the behavior of the WHO during COVID. I don't think that, covered the idea of multilateralism in any kind of glory. The behavior of scientists during COVID generally, is going to undermine faith in any kind of multilateral exchange or rule-based order. And then you have, entities like the ECHR, which seem to make it impossible for governments to run any kind of sensible immigration policy and lead to this, incredibly corrosive phenomenon where the more people vote for change, the more they get the same or more of the same thing. So I think we've really allowed that system to decay and to move away from the interests of our publics and even the ideals that they were founded to uphold.
So, Gideon, is it possible to reform it so that the liberal democracy does serve its citizens better?
Well, with difficulty. I mean, I think it's a trade-off. The people are prepared to accept the frustrations involved in the trade-off. I think it is really a very big question. Probably is, both Juliet and Francis touched upon the inability of democracies to deliver, particularly on illegal immigration, I think has been very, very corrosive. And the one bit of Trump's agenda that he is delivering on, and that seems to be very popular, is shutting down the southern border. However, he's doing it in a way that I would hope would repulse people, but maybe it won't. I mean, if you look at the stories of the deportations of these alleged Venezuelan gang members who get swept up, many of them apparently not members of Venezuelan gangs, and are 24 hours later in a supermax prison in El Salvador with no rights. I mean, I think it's pretty horrifying, but maybe people will be prepared to accept that trade-off. I just don't know. But I mean, I think on the whole strongman thing, however, as Robert Kaplan was saying, it is a crapshoot. And I think the one thing that in time could discredit the attractions, the supposed attractions of these models, is that they're often economically very inefficient because strongmen have very weird ideas about the economies. There are examples of strongmen who've done very well, the Lee Kuan Yew or Park Geun-hye in South Korea, who really delivered. But, why is Erdogan in trouble? Because he had crazy economic ideas, that inflation, you needed to control inflation by lowering interest rates and so on. Trump, I think, is, his obsession with tariffs could really damage the American economy in ways that eventually cause people to turn against his strongman model. So,
to continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.